Mark told me to close the door, not even glancing up from his tablet. I knew the moment I stepped into that dreary, windowless meeting room with its faded wallpaper and the lingering scent of stale coffee that something was amiss. Perhaps it was the empty chair beside him, usually reserved for human resources during these annual reviews. Maybe it was the strange, almost giddy grin on his face, like he'd just landed a major client instead of preparing to evaluate the person who'd single-handedly prevented Vivid Creations' entire content management system from dissolving into a digital mess. He began sifting through a file, much like one might unveil a dire diagnosis. "Your work is adequate." Adequate? This was the same agency that couldn't even send out client newsletters on time until I rebuilt their shoddy legacy platform at 3 a.m., hunched over my laptop, fueled by lukewarm tea and a stubborn refusal to fail. Mark leaned back, hands clasped behind his head, embodying an almost comical self-satisfaction. "But let's be honest, Anne. You're more of a task doer than a visionary." I blinked. "Excuse me?" He continued. "You know, head down, fingers flying, brilliant at executing, but not quite at strategic thinking." "Oh, so that's how this was going to unfold." He offered a smile, the kind that usually precedes news of a significant loss, except this time, what died was my lingering belief in corporate loyalty. "So, we're passing on the raise this year. Budgets are tight, and frankly, we need people who think bigger." That's when something inside me clicked. Not a violent snap, more like the quiet, precise turning of a lock. Cold, clean, and utterly final. My face remained impassive, though internally, my resolve was hardening like freshly poured concrete. I wanted to ask if Mark even knew what my daily tasks entailed, but I already knew the answer. He probably thought workflow was a type of exercise bike. Strategy, he called it. I had built the very framework on which their so-called strategies rested. "I see," I said, my hands folded calmly in my lap, mimicking the compliant posture he expected. It's a common fallacy with people like Mark. They mistake silence for submission. What he didn't realize was that every inch of Vivid Creations' digital backend, every content API call, every user authentication module, every scheduled data sync and microservice ran on code I had personally licensed to them. A license that, according to the paperwork I'd meticulously ensured legal had stamped 3 years ago, expired automatically upon the termination of my contract. A small clause I had highlighted, printed, and emailed to myself with a subject line that now felt like a prophetic warning, in case of corporate short-sightedness. Mark slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "We'd love to see you stay, though. You're reliable. You can help train the new hires." Reliable. Like a coffee maker or a stapler. Just something that works until it doesn't, and then you discard it. I stood, took the paper, and nodded. "Thanks, Mark. I'll give it some thought." I walked out of that room, my heart a drumbeat against my ribs, my eyes dry. There would be no dramatic exit, no slamming doors, no tearful speeches about respect. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter. But as I returned to my desk, my domain of quietly whirring servers and code editors humming secrets, a profound calm settled over me. Not peace, not yet, but the slow, deliberate shift of tectonic plates beneath a fault line. Because what they failed to grasp was that I had been preparing for this moment for years. It began at a small coffee shop in Portland, the kind where the Wi-Fi flickered every time someone used the microwave. Vivid Creations was just 3 ambitious guys, David, Emily, and Steve, with starry-eyed dreams and a flashy presentation deck. They couldn't afford a full development team, so they offered me equity and the promise of creating something truly groundbreaking. Groundbreaking, in this context, meant they couldn't pay me a proper salary until after their Series A funding, and they needed someone either foolish or desperate enough to build their entire back-end infrastructure solo. I was a bit of both, so I agreed. I built it. Nights, weekends, lunch breaks, fueled by cold pizza and a second monitor propped precariously between a toaster and a plant. While others were enjoying their lives, I was setting up scalable content delivery networks and user permission systems, a one-woman tech army. No one reviewed my code, no one offered assistance, but they certainly boasted about it in investor calls. I remember hearing David, the CEO, describe our world-class proprietary architecture as if he'd meticulously crafted it himself. Meanwhile, I was still debugging intricate data conflicts with one eye and babysitting a crucial deployment pipeline with the other. They gave me a firm handshake, vague equity promises printed on what felt like thin air, and a casual email chain approving me to build everything through my own LLC. For liability reasons, they said. I smiled and nodded. Fine, I'll be the contractor. But the contract itself? Oh, I drafted that like a prenuptial agreement from hell. Clause 14b. License to use core backend infrastructure non-transferable expires upon voluntary or involuntary termination of agreement, buried deep in legal jargon, signed by all three co-founders. And because I knew the universe appreciated irony, I highlighted it in yellow, screenshotted it, printed a hard copy, and emailed it to myself. Subject line: for when they forget who built this house. The betrayal wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, insidious drip. They stopped inviting me to product strategy meetings, stopped asking about the system's capabilities, and started dictating its functionalities. Features piled up like an unstable Jenga tower. A quick update would morph into full architectural overhauls with 2-day deadlines. When things worked, Mark took the credit. When they didn't, guess whose inbox was bombarded at 3 a.m. with urgent bug fix please? Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't an employee. I was the digital equivalent of duct tape, unglamorous, overused, and only appreciated until they thought they could replace me with something shinier. So, I planned. I automated license checks, setting up a daily authentication ping against a private server I owned, silent, invisible. When that heartbeat stopped, the system would lock down like a vault. I documented everything, in my own words, using my own tools, not out of paranoia, but from pattern recognition. I'd seen this narrative before. Creator builds kingdom. Kingdom forgets creator. Kingdom falls. They believed they owned the castle. I simply leased it to them, month to month, with a very explicit eviction clause. So, when Mark dropped that task doer line, as if he were quoting a motivational poster he barely understood, I didn't snap because I was hurt. I didn't even flinch because I was angry. I flinched because I knew they were already doomed. They just didn't know it yet. I submitted my resignation like returning an overdue library book. Clean, quiet, and perfectly timed. 2 weeks' notice, a gracious tone, not a single passive-aggressive word. My subject line simply read, Transition Plan, dated exactly 13 days before my license expiration clause was set to trigger. Not 14, not 12, but 13. So my last full day of employment would precede the backend's heartbeat check failure. The system would continue breathing until midnight, then it would flatline. I braced myself for an explosion. Instead, I got Mark. He skimmed the email on his phone, mid-bite of a pastry, powdered sugar dusting his beard. All right, well, we'll start posting your role ASAP. Should be easy to get someone offshore. Half the cost, right? I nodded, maintaining a neutral expression while my mind compiled a mental list titled, Reasons Mark Will Weep in Q4. A sweet intern named Kevin peered over his cubicle an hour later and whispered, Is it true you're leaving? I nodded again, and he looked as though someone had just told him the internet was canceled. But who's going to manage the content pipelines? Who knows the intricate data sync schedules? Who understands the fallback routing schema? I smiled. Apparently, someone offshore, half the cost. I walked back to my desk like a ghost attending her own funeral. I didn't touch a single line of code. I simply opened my monitoring dashboard, ran the final diagnostics, and downloaded everything: server logs, API request histories, content delivery reports, token refresh rates, even a snapshot of the cloud billing spikes during our last major product launch. Not because I needed them, but as receipts. I wanted proof of the kingdom I had built before they tried to tell people it was made of smoke and mirrors. I saved it all on an encrypted drive labeled gardening tips because Mark once asked if cloud storage meant keeping files on a rainy day, and I didn't trust him not to snoop in a moment of petty panic. The office buzzed with Monday apathy. No fanfare, no celebratory farewell, not even a stolen sticky note from my monitor. That's what stung the most, strangely. Not the insult, not the denied raise, not even the offshore jab. But how little it seemed to matter that I was leaving after years of keeping the entire operation running on sheer will, caffeine, and digital sorcery. I could have walked out that door with my laptop blazing like a Viking funeral pyre, and no one would have blinked. Good, because when the lights went out, I wanted them to be confused. I wanted that confusion to ferment into dread. I wanted them to look around and ask themselves, wait, who used to handle this? And then remember the woman they called a task doer when they thought she was just another cog in their dusty machine. The one who left with a quiet smile, a clean resignation letter, and a heartbeat server ticking like a doomsday clock, taped behind a wall no one thought to check. They had 13 days. I had all the time in the world. They brought in a team from somewhere that looked impressive on a PowerPoint slide. 5 developers in matching company-issued polo shirts, smiling as if they were about to fix a leaky faucet instead of entering a digital minefield laced with traps only I understood. Management beamed like proud parents. Mark even clapped a hand on one of their shoulders and declared, "This is the dream team, folks! Time to modernize our platform." They didn't even know which programming language half the platform was built in. On their first day, they tried to log into the Backend dashboard. Credential mismatch error. They tried again. Locked out. They flagged it. It flagged operations. Operations flagged legal. Legal flagged me. Except I wasn't there anymore. I was on my balcony, sipping iced coffee and watching birds squabble over a dropped croissant. Just as I planned. By day 3, they attempted a full migration. No rollback protocol, no dry run, just pure, unadulterated chaos. They spun up a new environment, tried to mirror the back-end code from the repository, only to realize the repository hadn't been touched in months, because the live code was continuously deployed from a private server. My private server. The validation ping fired off at midnight. It went out as usual, but this time, it returned a 4003. License expired. And with that, the heartbeat stopped. Services began failing like dominoes with vertigo. First, the client content dashboards went down. Then, the analytics suite. The authentication API suddenly failed. Users couldn't log in, admins couldn't access records, and error logs were generating so fast they looked like slot machines having seizures. They tried restarting containers. No luck. They checked system status. All green, except for the part that mattered. The license verification endpoint, which was now returning exactly 2 words in the response body, by Anne. Kevin, the intern, now awkwardly titled Temporary IT Support, raised his hand during the morning stand-up. Hey, I think the system was tied to an external license server, and it's rejecting all attempts to connect since Anne left. Mark waved him off. It's probably just a DNS caching issue. Clear it and move on. Kevin muttered. Pretty sure it's not that, Mark. Please let the professionals work. The professionals were busy trying to configure a sandbox environment using a README file I wrote in 2019 that explicitly stated in bold, "This is a temporary dev environment, used for staging at your own risk. Seriously, Mark, don't touch this." By Friday, 3 of the new hires had quietly removed Vivid creations from their LinkedIn profiles. One guy in quality assurance started sending his resume from a personal email titled Urgent Career Transition. I watched it all from afar, like someone observing their ex attempting to assemble flat-pack furniture without instructions. Sure, you feel a pang of fleeting empathy until you remember how that ex told you furniture assembly was a man's job. I didn't laugh, not out loud. I did take a screenshot of the public status page when it started displaying intermittent service across all systems, with a timestamp that precisely matched the moment my license died. I printed it and slid it into a folder labeled Closure. They thought digital architects were interchangeable, that you could pluck the core intelligence from a living system and plug in a clone with a smile and a coding certificate. Turns out, the system had a soul, and I owned it. The clock struck midnight like a courtroom gavel. Somewhere in the vast and indifferent cloud, my license validation server reached out, just as it had every night for the last 987 days, and quietly asked the question, "Is this contract still valid?" This time, for the first time, it received a single cold answer. No. No fireworks, no alarms, just a silent flick of a switch. Services still ran for a few minutes, like a chicken after decapitation, flapping on muscle memory. Then the collapses began. At 12:04 a.m., the load balancer stopped routing requests to the authentication service. At 12:07, user dashboards failed to load. By 12:11, every client-facing portal timed out with a 500 error. By 12:18, the support ticket system, also back-end dependent, choked and died. The next morning, the office awoke to the smell of smoldering systems and the collective screech of 100 client inboxes exploding like airbags. Every notification from their support software, every missed scheduled task, every failed login attempt was a drop in the digital storm that Vivid Creations was completely, irrevocably unprepared to weather. "Hey, Mark, the client portal's down." No response. "Mark? Nothing?" That's because Mark, in all his business casual glory, had decided to take the day off to mentally reset after navigating the challenges of team transitions. Translation: he left a 5-person offshore development team and one terrified intern holding a bag full of angry digital snakes. Meanwhile, the newly hired CTO, some buzzword enthusiast named Brenda, was standing in front of a whiteboard scribbling root cause analysis like it was going to resurrect the servers. "I think the main issue is a missing environment variable," she offered, sipping from a mug that said #BossBabe in a playful font. Kevin, now wearing the hollow stare of someone who's witnessed war crimes and endless log files, whispered, "It's not a variable. It's a license. The codebase isn't technically owned by us. It was leased, and the lease expired." Brenda blinked. "Who leases back-end architecture?" "Apparently we do," Kevin replied. At 9:30 a.m., the first investor email arrived with the subject line, "Urgent Platform Outage." By 10:12, a major client threatened to terminate their contract if access wasn't restored by end of day. At 11 sharp, an emergency Zoom call lit up the executive calendar. Half the company joined from their phones because the internal network was too fried to sustain video. Mark finally appeared in the group chat with a message that read, "Someone call Anne." They didn't even know what they were truly asking for. Not really. But I did. Because while they were tripping over themselves, scrambling to spin disaster into actionable deliverables, I was sitting on my couch in sweatpants, sipping a double-shot espresso out of a chipped mug that said, "World's Okayest Developer." I'd already seen the LinkedIn notifications. 3 recruiters, 2 competitors, 1 ex-colleague from 5 years ago who messaged, "Hey, I heard about the Vivid Creations thing, LOL. You interested in some freelance work?" I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I opened up my private system monitor, watched the red bars dance like devil's teeth across the screen, and leaned back with a quiet, measured breath. It wasn't revenge. It was simple arithmetic. I built the thing. I owned the thing. They let me walk. And now, the thing was gone. The 1 p.m. all-hands call wasn't a meeting. It was a funeral. 62 faces, most of them frozen on bad webcams, watched the CTO stumble through a presentation titled Backend Restoration Roadmap. It should have just read, "We're completely screwed." Brenda clicked through a flowchart that looked like a conspiracy theory wall drawn by a raccoon. So, as you can see, the authentication services failed due to a cascading timeout in the legacy infrastructure, she said, mispronouncing infrastructure like it had an extra syllable. Kevin unmuted. That's not what happened. She paused. Excuse me? He cleared his throat. It's not legacy. It's Anne's system, and it didn't fail. It was shut off intentionally. The license expired. There's a clause in her contract. I found it. Silence. Long and heavy. Then a VP in a crisp vest spoke up, face pale. Wait, we don't own the back end? Kevin shook his head. Nope. We rented it from her LLC, and the license was non-transferable, expires upon termination. Somewhere in the virtual office, a junior lawyer let out an audible. Oh, goodness. That's when things went full tilt. Emails started pinging archived chains. HR tried to deny knowledge of the agreement until someone forwarded the original signed PDF with the clause highlighted, annotated, and approved by a now retired compliance officer who'd simply written, "Looks fine," next to it. Someone from finance muttered that they might have to restate earnings if the platform's continuity couldn't be guaranteed. A man with a Bluetooth earpiece whispered, "This is breach territory," a spell he hoped might ward off litigation. Meanwhile, I was sitting cross-legged on my patio, watching hummingbirds fight over a flower. My phone buzzed every 4 minutes. LinkedIn messages piled up like unpaid invoices. One from a recruiter named Jessica. Saw the Vivid Creations outage. Your name's been coming up. You open to something more stable? CTO slot, base $220K, options and bonus. Another from my old friend, Tara. Are you seeing this? Mark just posted some vague, taking responsibility and reflecting post on LinkedIn. He turned off comments. LOL. I grinned, took a sip of cold brew that had gone watery, but still tasted like victory. Back in the Zoom call, Mark had finally slithered onto the screen. His hair was disheveled, his voice cracked like drywall under pressure. So, yes, we're reviewing the situation. Legal's involved, hoping to reconnect with Anne soon to work something out. Someone asked, "Why didn't we back it up?" Mark shrugged. We thought we had ownership. She never said anything. I actually laughed out loud because I did say something, many times. They just didn't listen. I had the emails, the annotated contracts, the flagged documents, all of it. They thought silence meant ignorance. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't quiet because I didn't know what I was worth. I was quiet because I knew exactly how much they'd pay when they finally figured it out. And baby, the meter was running. The first call came at 7:42 p.m., unknown number, a West Coast area code. I let it ring, then again 20 minutes later. This time, a voicemail. Hey, Anne, it's Mark. Listen, we've hit a few snags, nothing major, just some hiccups with the back-end stuff. We were wondering if you might be available for, I don't know, just a few hours of help? Quick migration support? Call me. I didn't call. The email followed at 9:13 p.m. Subject, quick assistance. Hi, Anne. We're in a bit of a time-sensitive situation and would appreciate your expertise just to get the team oriented. Happy to compensate for your time, of course. Nothing extensive, just a few pointers. I read it while brushing my teeth. Then the text started. Anne, we really need your help. Clients are furious. This doesn't reflect well on you either, by the way. Mark. Not trying to guilt trip, just being real. Anne, we'll make it worth your while. That one made me snort so hard I had to spit toothpaste into the sink. At 10:27 p.m., I replied, Hi, Mark. I'm currently available on a limited consulting basis. My rate is $475 an hour with an 80-hour minimum. Full upfront payment required to reserve time. I do not work under NDA, non-compete, or any derivative gag clause. Scope of work must be provided in writing before the first session. Please let me know if you'd like an invoice. He didn't respond for 8 hours. At 6:02 a.m. the next morning, I woke up to this. Fine, we accept. Please send invoice and terms. Oh, now they were ready to talk. So I did. I sent over a beautifully formatted invoice with a subject line that read, Digital Alchemy Professional Services Agreement. I made sure to include an itemized breakdown. Line 1, Emergency Technical Consulting, Backend Restoration Support. Line 2, Strategic Oversight of System Stabilization, because strategy is important, right? Under terms, I included the following conditions. Payment due within 24 hours of invoice receipt. Client waives all prior ownership claims to codebase or documentation. All consulting to be performed remotely, on Ann's schedule. No NDA, no non-competes, no silence. Client agrees to publish a formal correction on LinkedIn, clarifying previous task doer language as inaccurate. That last one? Petty, maybe. But when you've been the one keeping the servers alive with sheer grit, coffee, and a dozen cleverly integrated modules, you earn a little bit of petty. They didn't even push back. Within hours, payment hit my account in full. 80 hours at my rate, prepaid for a job I could finish in 3. Because this was never about time. It was about proof. Proof that they knew now what they hadn't known when Mark was chewing his pastry and telling me I was replaceable. They thought they were buying my time. What they really bought was a seat at the feet of the task doer they never understood was the queen of the digital jungle. I walked through the glass doors of Vivid Creations at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp, wearing jeans, boots, and a hoodie that said, I void warranties. No badge this time, no awkward smile at reception, just a temporary visitor pass clipped to my pocket like a medal for a successful campaign. The silence when I entered the development bullpen was delicious. The offshore team stared like I was a ghost from a legend, the one who came before. Kevin looked up from his terminal and whispered, Oh, thank goodness. Brenda, the boss babe's CTO, power walked out of the conference room with 2 interns flanking her like emotional support animals. Anne, thanks for coming. We've, isolated the issue, but can't reestablish service continuity. We're hoping you can just stabilize things. She tried to say it with confidence, but the tremble in her voice betrayed her. I bet she'd Googled 3 tech acronyms last night, and 2 of them were mine. Sure, I said calmly, dropping my laptop bag on the table like a sheriff returning to town for one last showdown. Point me to the terminal. 3 hours. That's all it took. I authenticated into the validation server, disabled the license check, spun up the original containers, restored database sync points from my private mirror, and recompiled the service endpoints with their original keys. Keys only I still had access to. The system breathed like it had been underwater and was finally surfacing. One by one, the services flickered green. Dashboards loaded. Clients logged in. Metrics returned to normal. At 1:07 p.m., I uploaded one single file to the internal knowledge base. A PDF titled Unnecessary Documentation, with pages of perfectly organized, clean, foolproof infrastructure notes. The first page had a sticky note graphic with my old internal chat message printed across it. Do you want this documented? Or are we still pretending this runs on magic? And then, I left. I walked through the office with no fanfare, no effusive thank yous, just a nod to Kevin, a wink to the stunned QA guy, and silence from the peanut gallery of middle managers pretending to circle back on urgent matters. And then I saw him, Mark. He was by the elevator, holding a cup of burnt breakroom coffee, wearing a wrinkled shirt that used to scream authority and now barely whispered employed. His ID badge was missing a stripe, a visible demotion. He looked at me. I looked right through him. "Anne," he said, voice low. I tilted my head. "Mark." A beat of silence passed, like a virus on mute. I didn't know. "You didn't read," I corrected. That was the problem. He opened his mouth again, perhaps to apologize, or maybe to spew more beige corporate noise. I was already walking. What I didn't tell him, what no one at Vivid Creations knew yet, was that 37 minutes before I arrived that morning, I signed a full-time contract with Nexus Innovations, their biggest competitor. Double the pay, equity, full technical autonomy. They handed me the keys to a clean server room and said, "Build us the future." I was already 2 weeks into sketching their backend. Bigger, better, bulletproof, with full ownership. No rentals this time. So, no, I didn't burn the bridge. I bought the land around it, rerouted the digital river, and let the bridge rot. As the elevator closed behind me, I pulled up my phone and checked the onboarding chat from Nexus Innovations. A developer had pinged, "Hey Anne, just curious, what's our license structure going to look like?" I typed back, "Mine. End. Lesson learned." This story isn't just about getting even, it's about knowing your worth and strategically protecting your contributions. In any professional environment, especially in creative or technical fields, your skills are your most valuable asset. Ensure your agreements clearly define ownership and usage of your work. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself when undervalued, and always be prepared for what comes next. Your silence doesn't mean submission. It can be the calm before a powerful, well-deserved comeback. Believe in your expertise, document your achievements, and remember that true value always reveals itself.